running through my veins, and I love you so much. You're my all, my everything. Now I dedicate my life to you. Oh, hello from the other side. I must have cried 1,000 times. Wanna tell you I'm sorry for everything that I've done. When I call, I know that you'll always be there. Hello from the outside. I will never say goodbye. My Lord, I love you for everything that you've done. You saved me from life. It doesn't tear me apart anymore. Brother, if you love her, then dance for a hand. Sister, if you honor yourself, marry him. And if you're still searching for that special Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. So this is the location that we plan to build the first Islamic building in the United States of America. The buildings inside of the land itself. So it was a former school. I used to be a school for special needs, but then unfortunately I was rented to the chicken farm. So many of those buildings are unuseful. Several buildings that we are going to renovate. This is the parking lot here. This is the parking lot. And at the moment, renovating. This is the first house. This is quite large house. There are 6 or even 7 rooms inside of the house, so it's quite big house. This house, inshallah, is going to be temporarily dorm for the teachers and also for the principal, but also can be used for office temporarily. And then this big buildings is going to be demolished because it cannot be used at all. In this place, we are going to build a mosque. So there will be a mosque here, and then to the left side of this mosque there will be a library and also a Mu'allaf center here in this area. We are going to build, inshallah ta'ala, when the fund is collected, we are going to build a mosque and Mu'allaf center and library here in this area. Now going down, coming back again, that is the old house. It is already renovated, it's beautiful at the moment, ready for use. On the other side of the house, the second building, that one, that building is going to be used as a dorm for the students, where the students, stay in that. There are 4, and then we have building number 3. It is now also going to be renovated. That building is going to be classes, but also going to be a prayer room because it's quite huge inside. Now, the rest of the buildings are going to be demolished, including the big domes. There's the big house is going to be demolished, of course, because not used at all. We want this to be an object for people to enjoy. And then those are. But as you see, as we are moving down, first line. So we go down, you see some other facilities at the back. We're in the process of building a basketball court, and also swimming pool is under renovation. And also we're going to have a volleyball field, and of course soccer. At the location, we're going to have soccer field. It is truly beautiful because you feel the sense of nature. You can hear the birds, you see the green around the trees. The weather is good. Learning. And the other several buildings are going to be demolished. It's under renovation at the moment. Hopefully by this summer we can use it for kids, because we're going to have our summer program here for the kids. So I hope that they will enjoy not only learning, but also outdoor activities, including sports. And we have swimming for them already by this July. On the other side, we are in the process of building basketball court, basketball field here, and our contractors are working very hard to make all these facilities ready in the land, now under renovation. And then we're going to have tennis here on the right, volleyball and tennis court on the right, and of course towards the back side. But the land continues towards the end of this jungle. This jungle belongs a few minutes ago back. So this jungle belongs to us, and beyond the jungle there is a pond. We're going to renovate that pond for fishing things. Okay. So these are the facilities that we're going to utilize here at this place, inshallah. But again, the location is quite larger than that. We have forests where people can do hiking. There's a pond where they can do fishing. And not far from here, of course, there's a lake where people can also do fishing. This is basically the city of a kind of tourist destination where people are coming in the summer. There's a beautiful castle on the other side, and also waterfall not far from here, so it's like 7-minute drive from this location. So this is a very ideal place for people to come and enjoy summer, but also for students to learn. So the purpose of this long-term build is a kind of seminary for in the Christian term, where people can prepare themselves to be preacher or priest. Also, we plan to have that Islamic boarding school for youngsters, inshallah.
What you're doing, or is this like your own?
Yeah, so that's what exactly my intention, to build what we call in Indonesia pesantren. And pesantren is equivalent to the word Islamic boarding school. But our Islamic boarding school is quite different from the word madrasah in the Middle East, where madrasah in the Middle East is primarily, learning of the Quran and the prophetic hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. While in Indonesia, when you say pesantren or Islamic boarding school, means it is really a full-time school. In addition, you're learning also religion. You're learning Quran, Arabic language, and other stuff that is related to the teachings. truly a very comprehensive learning center for Muslims. We are going to have a computer learning center. We are going to have different stuff that we are going to have here in this location.
And is this something you've kind of always wanted to do, or is it just kind of an opportunity sort of came upon you?
That's what I always have in mind. The reason is this. There is a stigma, but in the minds of some friends in the West, that Islam is primarily Middle Eastern, or dominated by Middle Eastern interpretations, or even cultures. So we would like to present a different style, a different face of Islam in terms of cultures, in terms of social, related issues. That it is not necessarily Middle Eastern. It is not necessarily even South Asian or Pakistanis or Indians. There are a huge number of Muslims in Southeast Asia, including in Indonesia and Malaysia. So we'd like to present this as a new alternative, which is more, in my understanding, more face of Islam. That's what we want to tell our neighbors around this group here.
And last question, is this for boys and girls, or just?
It is for boys and girls, for both. And hopefully we're going to have some So, and I have a very ambitious plan. Long term, it may take up to even more than 5 years. We are going to build new buildings, and the buildings will be characterized as Indonesian in nature, where you have even a mosque, but it's not necessarily looks like a mosque. Okay, so we are going to have these several buildings that represent, for example, traditional homes in Indonesia, like Javanese home, Sumatra home, or Sulawesi homes. But that can be dorms for the students. The reason why I am having this planning is because also to introduce that Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. And we have to let our neighbors, our friends know that when you talk about majority Muslim countries, it's not Egypt, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's not Iran or Pakistan, it is Indonesia. And that's why the buildings that we're going to build here are going to be characterized. The characteristic of the building will be like Indonesian in nature. That's what our plan will be. As under invitation also. Because we're going to build stairs where people can see them. But our land is further extended back. Primarily from the United States, but we plan to have some big program with Indonesian boarding school, with our boarding school. So possibly we can accommodate some of them to come here for a few months to learn, because my purpose is to have them global minds. As you know that Santara Foundation at the moment had a program called a Global Leadership Program, where we sponsor every year 2 terms. Each term is 12 students. So we have 24 students every year coming to the United States to learn leadership, to learn about interfaith dialogue, to learn about other communities, to interact with them, experience living with non-Muslims, because we Muslims in the majority Muslim country, oftentimes we are not exposed to the outside world. So it is very important for the student to go out and learn from others, and that's the purpose. So we have that, particularly in the United States of America. Itu yang again, it belongs to us.
Shamsi Albi.
Educational purposes. This will be kept as it is, forest. Okay. We are going to clean it for hiking, for different stuff in the future. And again, around 10 acres from here, there is a big pond where you can fish, basically. It also belongs to us. If you go back behind this summertime. I truly love to come here, sit down in the day even, because you can still hear the sound of the birds. All right, that's this filial part of his.
Hello. Hi. Well, great. I'm Edda. Just so you know, I forget names. I remember faces.
Okay.
So I may see the road shore or
Possibly.
and I'm like, so eventually I remember.
Our priorities is to be a part of the community.
Yeah.
We want our neighbors also to feel a part of it.
Sabtu ke rumah mama ya.
You know, we feel that we belong.
I hope other people have come.
Yeah, we invite, you know, but they will come around 7:30.
Oh, man, I didn't know what time. I thought it was like.
Come and sit and
All right. You're not going to take pictures of me all night, are you?
Okay. Yeah.
Very cool.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good morning. Imam Ali.
Oh, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I was just searching your screen name. So this one.
Are changing, so it's not as for whatever reason. How are things in New York?
It's is I think it fall is the beginning now. It looks like it's good.
Yeah.
Very.
I heard. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum.
Oh,
Greetings of peace.
Ralph, how are you, Ralph?
Good.
Hi, Ralph.
Ralph he used to be the chief commander of the peacekeeping operation at the United Nations.
Oh, amazing. What
So he's general. He's Egyptian, originally from Egypt, but he's now in America.
what a task that is. Wow.
Yes. Keep the world peace. Or peaceful.
A lot of responsibility with that one. Whew.
Yes. And his wife is so actively involved in many interfaith and other activities at the United Nations. You know, they are. I wanted to enter the United Nations. I simply call him. I didn't need any ID. He just said to the security, "Hey, it's my guy."
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, Imam Ali, I was just reflecting on the last time I saw you, in Queens, and that was just such a memorable weekend. I mean, I want to use the term great, but it was also kind of sorrowful in ways because of the Christ Church thing. We were dealing with that, but
Exactly.
it was awesome to spend time in your home that morning, and we had. I think we had, yeah, wow, look at that. I love that picture, yeah. Dunkin' Donuts, yeah.
Yes.
Amazing, yeah. Your environment is just, it just had a warmth to it. I felt at home, which is always a blessing when you can feel home away from home.
So thank you. Such an honor to have you in my house.
Oh, yeah, no, it was my honor. It's amazing.
How's the baby, by the way?
Oh, she's amazing.
Wow.
My God, yeah. What an experience. What a blessing. Everything went really well. Miriam is okay, and she's actually doing great. She's in a rhythm, and I think I had the jitters that any new parent would have in terms of, oh my God, am I ever going to sleep? Am I going to do this? But thankfully, by God's blessing, Clara has been quite easy. She has Miriam's temperament, and I hope she did. She's just very kind of peaceful and easy stuff. So it's just a blessing.
Yeah.
I love it. And my parents are being very safe with traveling, and thank God for FaceTime. Without FaceTime, they wouldn't be able to see her. So we're hoping in the spring.
Hopefully,
Yeah. But it all depends.
we're really praying that hope this will pass soon.
Yes. Yeah,
So
I was. Yeah.
at 9 o'clock, so I'm going to mute everybody, and then I will ask you again to unmute yourself so that we can. Okay, please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Okay, great. So only two of us are muted, and we have almost 100 here on Zoom, and I think people are coming more. This is being broadcasted on the ITV USA, Islamic TV, also Kalam TV, book publisher, and of course on our own Facebook Live, and we have also on YouTube. So we have quite a lot of people watching this discussion. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace and good morning for those who are in the States. Good evening for those who are in Bangladesh or in Indonesia. Thank you all for joining. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to once again hosting our great friend, scholar of religion, anthropologist, Dr. Craig Considine. At this time, we are hosting him to talk about this book, but I think our discussion is going to be even larger than just a book. I've been knowing Dr. Considine since 2008 when we met for the first time, when I was an Imam at the Islamic Cultural Center, which is well known in New York City as the 96th Street Mosque. At that time, he came with his professor, Dr. Akbar Ahmad, who was the chair of Ibn Khaldun in the university, and he was also former of the Pakistani ambassador to UK. So he was a prominent person, and I was one of the persons who interviewed at that time. So since then we got connected, but then we disconnected until I think 3 years ago. I constantly follow him on his social media, where he defended what he considered to be the truth and the right thing to defend. And then I invited him to come to my annual event, the Nusantara Foundation event in New York City. I would like to say that Dr. Considine is among one of the few scholars of religion who commit themselves to build bridges between faith traditions. I highly appreciate his fairness and his view of others' faith tradition. A person who judges the truth as a truth and not on the basis of his own personal affiliated sentiments. For this reason, Dr. Considine has been fully committed to defend what he knows about the truth of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, particularly on his social media. If you follow him, you're going to be amazed. As a public figure, it is deeply challenging. It's not easy. Having accused as secretly Muslim or leftist or liberal or propagandist and so on and so forth. From the Muslim side, having also labeled as someone, even last night I saw on his Facebook, someone says, why you're so obsessed with the Prophet and you are still ignoring him? It looks like, many Muslims want him to declare his Shahada. Now, I think because we are Muslims are too much obsessed with this formality. We fail to understand that faith is about heart and mind. It is about human character. And I'm not shy to say that Dr. Considine is the Muslims in essence, because, he believes in what he believes. And I think it's not exaggeration to say that he is the Muslims in essence. Although, according to some judgment of Muslims, that probably he is not Muslim, but he is the Muslims in essence. And the rest, Allah is to judge ahkamul hakimin, as we say that in Arabic language. And so his latest book, I think, Humanity of Muhammad, is a testimony misperceived, sorry. Let me once again, on behalf of the Muslims and on behalf of Islam, deserve to be defended. I have a few questions, and later on I'm going to open this to our participants to comment, to ask questions. Also, I have to mention that we have some universities presidents joining us from Jakarta, from Makassar, from different cities in Indonesia. And we have prominent Muslims also. I don't know if Haidar here, who is the chairman of Mizan, Nura Book, the company that publishes your book in Indonesia, is also joining us. And I hope that Haider and others can comment at the end. And so I'd like to ask you a few questions before the book itself. And I'm sure that the first one is already asked many times, even by me also last time. Can you once again tell us, if a boy, if I may say, of Irish Italian descent, how did you overcome the environment that is oftentimes, is deeply ignorant of the faith?
First, Imam Ali, such a pleasure to be with you once again, my friend, but also my mentor and a role model for me. So deeply humbling as well to hear your words about me and my work and the truth, like if people can see someone like me as just someone standing for the truth, I mean, that is truly humbling. So I thank you for that. I will say I think the disconnect that we had is partially due to me living in Europe for 7 years, because right when we had the Journey into America experience in 2008, I moved to Dublin, and I was gone, and we were on different time schedules. But we were there in spirit, Imam Ali. There's no question. And then before I dive into the personal journey to Imam Ali, I would just like to say that those comments that you make about being Muslim, in essence, I always use this actually in my talks, because I think it really does get down to the meaning of what does it mean to be a Muslim, and I see answers to that question in a similar regard to how I define my own identity as a Christian. So I like and I appreciate the fact that you can look at a faith category in this way. I think it's very inclusive, and I appreciate it. So my personal journey really started without me really kind of knowing on the day of 9/11. I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school at Needham High in the suburbs of Boston. Needham, to this day, is a town of about 30,000 people, about 98% of which would be of Western European descent, a lot of Irish, English, Scottish, Italian. There's also a pretty sizable Jewish community. We had Christian denominations of all sects. I think there's something like 9 or 10 different Christian churches in town, and then we also have 2 synagogues. I was born and raised in a Irish and Italian Catholic household. My mother's side of the family was particularly religious, the Italian side. My father's side, not so much. When 9/11 happened, there was absolutely no social context for someone like me to make sense of what happened, especially as a young man. In Catholic school, we never learned about other faiths. We learned about Catholicism, largely focusing on the rituals and the practices, which I look back on now and I appreciate, because I appreciate the formality of Mass. In Needham, to this day, there's really no Muslim population. The closest masjid is actually in Roxbury, where Imam Suhaib Webb used to be, and that's about 9 miles away. I also had never met a Muslim in my life, and I remember distinctly, and I make reference of this in the book, the thing that sticks out the most on that day, obviously watching on the television, back when televisions were I remember seeing people in the hallways shouting, USA, USA, in very kind of patriotic fervor. And then later that day, I started hearing things that I won't repeat here, but somehow Arabs and Muslims got into this. No one around me, myself included, knew anything about any of these categories. So my lived experience really was socialized through that. Your brain starts buying into the false narrative, buying into the stereotype, buying into the media coverage. So 2001, the invasion of Afghanistan happens. 2003, the invasion of Iraq happens, and I'm in college, and all of these things are happening around me. And I wanted to actually figure out why something like 9/11 happened. You know, who were these bad people? How can I prevent this from happening? So I go to American University in Washington, D.C. with the aim of being somewhere kind of in politics and diplomacy, somewhere in that kind of realm. And I was taking classes in Arabic, and I enrolled in Professor Ahmed's The World of Islam. And you know, I'm walking into the class thinking, well, here we go. What is this Muslim professor going to say? You know, is he going to defend 9/11? Like, what's going to happen? And Professor Ahmed just starts talking about the importance of knowledge. Knowledge. So what about Al Qaeda? You know, what about the Taliban? No, knowledge. And he provided the hadith, the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. And that one line really shook me to my core as a human. It my soul in a way that actually kind of irritated me, because I felt like, in a way, I had been kind of duped. I had been brought on this path that really was not the truth. And Dr. Ahmed opened up a new kind of road for me, this one of knowledge, and knowledge not merely through books, through peer-reviewed journal articles, through conferences, but really knowledge through human experience. Professor Ahmed, being an anthropologist and a notable scholar, you know, I was blessed because he brought me on this journey across the United States for a year, and we went to over 100 mosques, and I just got to see the whole entire country, not just the Muslim communities, but we were meeting with all different religious communities. And the amount of knowledge I gained, the inspiration that I gained from that, I thought then, this is something that God is calling me to do, something like this, understanding people, interacting with people. So that's my journey. In terms of how it's challenging, man, there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of layers to it. Being a scholar is difficult in its own right, in terms of having to write and publish. But when I started all of this writing out, and I was largely being attacked by what people would refer to as the Islamophobia industry. So I wrote an article on comparing George Washington's book called The Rules of Civility with some of the hadith related to Muhammad's life. And I was just comparing their moral character, you know, talking about things like how to treat people on a everyday basis. And this really irritated the Islamophobia industry. And for years, I was the target of a lot of different accusations, you know, being funded by some oil tycoon in the Middle East, or being, you know, funded by Saudi Arabia. But then there's also increasing backlash, actually, in the last couple years from people who identify as Muslims. And this is kind of the same narrative. Like, they think that I'm here as like a CIA person, or I'm working for like George Soros to kind of make Muslims more liberal or something. And they attack me for that. And they think I have an agenda, you know, like this is like the Freemasons are here and this is the New World Order type thing, which is, you know, bizarre. But and I'll say this, like a thing that I find difficult about Ali, truly, it actually came about after the Hagia Sophia reconversion, and I had put some comments out, and I'll explain what I put out. I just said I was disappointed in the decision. I would have loved for it to stay a kind of secular museum. If they wanted to open it up to prayer, I thought it should have been a building in which Muslims and Christians could both share in a way that was conducive to their faith. So I thought that was pretty moderate. It's a pretty moderate approach, and I put it out on my social media, and I just was bombarded with attacks. And this is difficult because, you know, people are familiar with my work, and I think they expect certain things with my work. But like when I share a personal view, which is not even like it's not even linked to my religion. It's not like I want Christian prayers to be said here, but like when I take my own position and it doesn't align with the positions of others, now all of a sudden I become like a sellout, or somehow, you know, Hagia Sophia comes and I flip on them. So these are the type of things that I deal with, but it's okay.
And I think that represent two things. Number one, there is an instability in terms of emotion. In other words, people tend to be into extreme. They are very easily loving someone, but very easily also fall into hating someone because that lacking of instability in emotions. And that's what extremism happened, basically. And secondly, of course, we are lacking of maturity in our differences, that we have to be mature on our differences. Now, thank you so very much. I just wanted to go directly to the book itself. I'm sure that this is a part of your academic, journey or work, but I cannot separate this from your effort to introduce the true face of our prophet. And as you call yourself an Islamist, how you call that?
An apologist?
Apologist, Islamic apologist. I think this is something that for us Muslims, highly deserve to be appreciated. My question is, Prophet Muhammad had been, discussed, had been written by many, including, of course, by Karen Armstrong on his book, The Prophet of Our Time. But if I may ask this question, and of course I read it, but I just wanted to ask you so that you can tell the audience, what is the uniqueness of the book that you're presenting to us? What might be different from others, books that have been written about the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him?
Thank you, Imam Ali. That's a good question. And let me first say a little note on the Islamic apologist thing, right? So I mentioned this in the book. An apologist is really someone that just defends a certain position. It's kind of simple, and it goes back to like ancient Greek philosophers. And this was a term that the Islamophobia industry actually placed me in. And I thought about it, and I actually embraced it. And I said, well, I actually have no problem being an Islamic apologist. And the reason why I say that is two kind of categories. One is theological, and I see a lot of similarities between the Christian and Islamic traditions, in addition to the Jewish tradition. This conviction that I have of the similarities of the faith is actually getting stronger as I get older, because I'm reading more and I'm engaging more. So I defend things in other faiths that are also in my faith, monotheism, belief in the day of judgment, importance of compassion and mercy and justice. So I defend it for these reasons. And then there's the personal reason, because I see Muslims around the world, in my communities, in my life, my friends like you, Imam Ali, who are quite simply great people, who I will defend. And your faith inspires you to live the life that you live. And I love that, and I'm willing to defend that. So the book, it's unique, I think, for two reasons. One, there aren't many sociologists in the world focusing on the sociology of Muhammad, or really even the sociology of Islam. And the book is quite short and it's simple, and each chapter is dedicated to a theme, which are largely sociological. So we have concepts like religious pluralism, civic nation building, anti-racism, women's rights. And authors like Karen Armstrong and Fred Donner and Juan Cole and Martin Ling, some heavyweights, and I've read all of their biographies, and they're much, much better than mine. But they take a largely historical approach, kind of a linear approach from beginning to end of his life. And what I like to do is focus on sociological themes, but I like to focus on stories and relationships as kind of case studies. And the book logical angle, and then I think, and perhaps more importantly, it's timely. So I make sure throughout the entire book to relate what was happening in the 6th and 7th century with what is happening today. So one chapter focuses on touch with what's happening in the United States and in other countries around the world. You will know that anti-racism is actually a term that is actually becoming mainstream. It was not mainstream before these movements started hitting the streets. So the book is definitely timely as well.
Right, that's wonderful. I think one of the and I think it's paramount important for us Muslims in particular to learn, so that we can learn how to have this pluralist view of the society, the global society we live in. Tell us more about how do you see this as a Catholic in person, studied about the Prophet Muhammad and how he was so pluralist in his view, and being compassionate and loving to others. But Prophet Muhammad had demonstrated that and embraced each and every element of the community. Not only that they embraced them, they considered them as part of their nation, ummati in the language of Arabic language. That even the Jews and the Christians are called ummati by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it was in the 6th century, 6th, 7th century. It's not in the 21st century we live in. So how do you see this as a formally non-Muslim? Formally.
Yeah, well, one, I appreciate Prophet Muhammad's pluralist approach to life itself. And let me say a word briefly about pluralism. I largely depend on Professor Diana Eck of the Pluralism Project at Harvard University for my kind of anchor when I look at pluralism. And she doesn't say anything in her description, which I'll explain in a second, about this idea of the belief in pluralist gods, the idea that all gods and all entities that are worshipped are equal. That's not what Eck is saying with pluralism. She actually makes pluralism a sociological development or a way of being. And she describes it essentially as the energetic engagement with religious diversity. And she distinguishes it from tolerance. And she says that tolerance is quite standoffish, that it doesn't encourage human beings to engage because you just let people be. And she says that this is not enough anymore. In societies which are hyper diverse, it's not enough. We need to engage. And she also mentions, and this is important, and it goes back to my first point about this idea of pluralist and equal views of God. Eck is saying that pluralism is not this massive kumbaya session where everyone has to agree. It's not. It's a commitment to understanding, and it's a commitment to dialogue, and it happens in action. And she uses terms like give and take, the culture of encounter, as Pope Francis, I think, discusses and frames. And we see, again, Muhammad had his beliefs. He was a very firm monotheist. And he had disagreements with Christian communities. For example, the Christians of Najran, the issue of Christology. And they agreed to disagree in Masjid al-Nabawi. But what's important here is Muhammad, I think, understood to get to know one another. You have to get to know one another. And we know that in 622, Muhammad, a new type of nation in which your race, your ethnicity, your tribal affiliation, or your religion is not going to determine your rank in society, because it was a confederation of peoples. And if you think before the Constitution of Medina was kind of agreed upon, they all had to get to the table, the negotiating table. And he listened and he deliberated, and then they came up with this document that everyone agreed upon. I also think when we talk about pluralism, Imam Ali, one of my favorite stories is the first Hijrah in 615, when the early Ummah was being persecuted and Muhammad feared for his people's life, and he told his people that you're going to leave your homes you're going to go to the port and you're going to cross a ship on the Red Sea and you're going to go to a land that you've never been to before. I mean, think about that. That's what's happening with refugees today. It's a very scary prospect, isn't it? But Muhammad knew that there were truthful and righteous people outside of his own immediate community. He had learned that King Ibn Abjar, the Negus of Abyssinia, was a good man. And he was saying to his people, go and interact, seek asylum with this man. I mean, that is a type of engagement. It's a type of pluralism, understanding that there is truth in our world, even if it's outside of our immediate bubbles. And then lastly, I'll just say with the Christians of Najran in 630, Muhammad at the time was a rising statesman. He was trying to communicate his ummah, share this ummah with the world and outline its philosophies and its principles. And the Christians of Najran come to Medina and Muhammad opens the door. So immediately you're engaging energetically. This is not mere tolerance. He says, come in. They have a discussion of Christology, same way, and agree on everything. And when it came time for the Christians to pray, Muhammad actually allowed them to stay inside the masjid to offer their prayers. I mean, that is such a bold act that it wouldn't go over well today, even, because I like the idea, as I mentioned earlier, with the Hagia Sophia, sharing places of worship. I think it's really powerful. And Imam Ali, if you remember back in 2015, I think it was, the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., allowed Muslims to pray inside a very revered site within Christianity in this country. And there was such an outroar of that. And it's just remarkable to think that in 630, the year 630, this was happening between Muslims and Christians. It's remarkable.
Stories that many Muslims don't know or are lazy to learn, to read about, but it's in your book. It's all here mentioned, books, Humanity of Muhammad. In other words, the pluralism basically, it's more into a ta'aruf in the language of the Quran. All mankind we create from a male and a female, and you made you into many nations and tribes so that you get to know one another. And that's what that is about, acknowledging the existence of others, but not only acknowledgement, it's about embracing them, but also appreciating. Therefore, the Quran itself says, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that the most respected among in the sight of God are the most righteous ones. And remember that the beginning of this ayah talk about humanity. So it's not particularly about the Muslims. In other words, righteousness. Thank you so much. You just open our eyes onto it. And I encourage really the Muslim to read about all these stories mentioned by Dr. Considine about the Najran delegations, about the covenant of the Mount Sinai and others. There are many things that we miss. We don't read it, unfortunately. We are lacking in reading the history. The other issue that you mentioned briefly about the Medina Charter and how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established a very inclusive society in Medina that embraced every single element of the community. And you mentioned in your book that there is a parallel people are trying to, establish, including here in the United States. The founding fathers of the United States basically are very much close into what the Prophet Muhammad viewed about nation state. And so I'm sure you know that Fiqh Council of North America and many other religious affiliated organizations in America had considered that the goals of Sharia, the purpose of religious practices, are in line with the United U.S. constitutions. But my question today is for you. These days we see that conservatism is often connected to religious beliefs. We see that. I know people are feeling more religious. But the more religious they are, the more exclusive they are. And, now we are talking about the appointment of Supreme Justice, to the court. And so the more religious people are, the more they are exclusive. And why Prophet Muhammad can combine between conservatism, because he was a prophet, he was a religious person, but at the same time he opened himself and become so deeply inclusive. What do you think? What do you think about this? Why is it different?
Well, first I'd like to say, I think, one of the many strengths of Muhammad's character and conduct was his balance. his balance. You know, like this idea that you can hold these moral convictions and you can have this belief and you can live a certain way every day. You know, meeting your requirements and doing your rituals and drawing red lines on potential moral issues. But you know, at the same time, we can integrate into society. You know, like you don't have to compromise your faith in getting out there and interact with other people, with being productive members and constructive members of your societies, of befriending people outside of your religious traditions. You know, Muhammad was comfortable in many worlds, in many environments. He was well balanced in this way. Now, with the idea that, you know, the more religious, the more exclusive, Imam Ali, that is a tough one. I will say that I think it's interesting to look at social media and the influence that social media has had, if at all, on the exclusive understandings of religion that we have. And I think because social media is just a bombardment of information, a bombardment of truth claims, I think it's almost become like a marketplace. It's almost like a huge competition. And I think when people are seeing more and more products and narratives, they are kind of going more inwards. You know, they're kind of looking for something to be more comfortable with. You know, I don't want to buy all these things. That potentially being more exclusive. It's interesting. Can I say something about the founding fathers too?
Yes.
Do you mind, Imam Ali? So this was one of the main things that really sparked my interest in Islamic studies and Prophet Muhammad's life and legacy. My understanding of the United States is quite conservative, and it's found in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That's it. The Constitution provides freedom of speech, provides freedom of religion, the right to assembly, and so on and so forth. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All human beings are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's nothing in there that kind of creates a superiority complex or a hierarchy of power. What makes someone an American is not your race, your ethnicity, your religious background. What makes you call this a civic nation? A civic nation is one in which your sense of belonging is not predicated on how you were brought into this world, or the color of your skin, or the texture of your hair, or what country you're from. What makes you an American are these rights, and that's what we share. And together, collectively, ideally, we're supposed to create an open, inclusive society. This was what the founding fathers, at least in writing, had envisioned. You know, Denise Spellberg, the scholar because they knew quite well, because of what happened in Europe between Protestants and Catholics and among Protestants, that religion can be a very dicey and divisive issue, that religious can start persecuting one another if one religious community gets in power. And the founding fathers in the colonies, you had all these Protestant sects, and they were fighting each other. Most of them hated Catholics. I would be in rough shape in a revolutionary America. But they created something new to transcend this. It's the civic nation. And we distinguish this from the ethnic nation, which is based in ancestry, blood, language, heritage, you know, ethnic. Engaging with the Constitution of Medina, I was shocked that you have a political document created in 622 that really holds similar pillars in terms of envisioning what a state looks like and what kind of society comes out of a state. And we know in the Constitution of Medina that there was freedom of religion, there was freedom of worship. But I think more importantly, there was a feeling of codependency. And the document is actually quite clear on this, that if something happened to the Kanuka tribe or the Oz tribe in Medina, the Muslims would have to be connected to that. So what hurts one member of society hurts all. And society is a big tent, all the races, all the ethnicities, all the cultures. And that's what we should be in this country, at least ideally. And then let me also add, too, the Treaty of Tripoli, way back in the 1790s, was the first time a foreign nation recognized the independence of the United States. And the Tripoli states up in northwest Africa, modern day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, they actually entered into an agreement with the United States. This is in the late 1790s. There was 2 documents, the Treaty of Tripoli. And in that document, both George Washington, the first president, and John Adams both said in the text of this diplomatic exchange and agreement that the United States is not founded as a Christian nation and that it has no enmity towards Muslims. And I think it's important here, when they say it's not a Christian nation, it's like the government is not a Christian government. It's made up of Christians and that's okay, but we're not creating a religious government, if you know what I mean. And Muhammad arguably had a secular government in Medina.
Exactly. And I think this is quite similar to Indonesia. Indonesia is, as you may know, the largest Muslim country, but it's not an Islamic state nation. Looking into that understanding of pluralistic society. Making America great, making America kind, and this is my favorite.
I love it. Need more of those.
Yeah. But how do you see the racial issue will play in this coming, sorry to a little bit getting out from the topic, you see the racial issues playing in this coming election in the United States? Briefly.
I think, unfortunately, the end is not in sight. It's not near. I don't think there's enough public figures trying to really diffuse the situation. I think you have leaders across the spectrum, whether it's politics or not, really kind of putting their stake in the ground and not budging. And I don't think there's not enough dialogue between the competing sides. It's very, very divisive. And I really don't see a vision, Like one thing that I loved about Martin Luther King when I was a kid, and even to this day, I still admire the man deeply, was he was someone that was willing to do the hard work. He had a plan. What's happened in Louisville? That stuff's important, but we need big fundamental picture change in this country. Like fundamentally, how we look at our neighbors, how we imagine our nation. Pope Francis calls it we need a radical change. We need to start talking more about love and compassion. But unfortunately, we just don't see any of that.
So I think we need mental revolution. Possibly, yeah. Indonesian people call it revolution mental revolution. But also we need leadership. I think we need leadership who can lead us into that process. Thank you so much. I have many questions here, but I think I'm going to give a chance to our participant to ask questions. So I'd like to begin with Daniel Hamel.
Daniel.
Oh, Daniel. Oh, okay. Do you know him? Mr. Daniel Hamel, please.
Hey, Craig, how you doing?
I'm good, Daniel.
Long time no speak, huh?
Yeah, it's been a couple years. Yeah, I recognized your name.
Yeah,
you're an author of several books.
Correct, and we've published in the same publisher, Blue Dome. So.
Oh, right, excellent. Nice to reconnect.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to do your thing in Australia, but I just couldn't roll out of bed for that.
Yeah, 4 a.m.
Mr. Hamel is from Australia?
No,
I did a talk Friday.
Okay.
And it started at 4 a.m. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So I have a quick question, Craig, about a lot of the points that you were pointing out, and about Islam and being an inherently tolerant religion, right? Even from its foundations. And I wonder if that's one of your takeaways, is that Islam, through the Quran, through its lived experiences, through the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is an inherently tolerant religion, and that throughout its history, even beyond Medina, has been lived as a tolerant religion versus, other perspectives on Islam, like you probably are familiar with Robert Spencer's stuff. Islam is the world's most intolerant religion, and you hear this time and time again that Islam is kind of classified as this very intolerant faith, and you hear it all the time. And by the way, I'm coming at this as a Muslim. So I've been Muslim for almost 20 years, but not a religion as Islam, as a tolerant religion. And then, of course, talking about what you were talking about, how Islam is maybe more than just tolerant, and how like some of these sociological discussions are moving beyond tolerance. That it's not just a tolerant religion, but it's an inclusive religion. That the idea of ummah, like in the Constitution of Medina, wasn't just something that was for Muslims. That it was inclusive of all faith communities in Medina. So I wonder if you might want to touch on that a little bit.
Definitely.
Thanks, Craig.
First, let me say, Daniel, I'm thinking now about your book, and I actually read it maybe 4 months ago, and it's called Jesus and Muhammad, and what's the second part of it? Oh, he may not be there anymore. Anyways, for those listening, Daniel has written an excellent book about the similarities between Jesus and Muhammad, and he uses scripture to make points. It's an excellent book. I would agree with Daniel here, Dr. Hamill, on Islam being inherently inclusive. And there are a few things that come to my mind immediately. The inclusivity is especially prominent when we consider the Abrahamic tradition. And when we look at al-Kitab, people of the book, elevating specific communities to a special place, not making them better than other people, but this is Islam's recognition that Muslims are part of a continuity that is linked back to Abraham, some would say to Adam. So in this sense, it's inherently inclusive, that term, people of the book, which is the title of my next book. Also, one of the first things that Professor Ahmed taught me back in my college days, how often the words mercy and compassion are used in the Quran. Mercy and compassion. And it doesn't make any distinguishing elements to who that mercy and compassion is extended to. It doesn't just say, God is merciful, but only to certain people. God is merciful and compassionate as our Creator is. And I think that is inclusive in its own right. Us being part of God's creation, God expects us to take care of his creation through mercy and compassion. History, however, is much different. When I reflect back on the history of my own kind of religious Christian tradition, we see all sorts of horrors as it's related through Scripture. We know that Jesus cared most, and I'm sure most Muslims would agree with this. Jesus cared about bringing peripheral members of communities to the center, to get them involved, to make them feel like they're wanted, to provide them with essential services. Now, when we think of Muhammad's life, it's actually not too different. When we look at his relationship with Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian slave who Muhammad freed with Abu Bakr, and then Bilal is raised to a prominent position of muezzin in the early Ummah. We have Muhammad talking about orphans, the importance of orphans. He's talking about the importance of women who should not merely be treated as these kind of objects. So he's inclusive in this way too. It's not merely between religions, it's also amongst and within societies, within communities. So, finally, Dr. Hamill, when you talk about the word ummah, and I have been researching this all summer. When we think about the word ummah, I think it really transcends the words Muslim and Islam to me, because of what we see happening in Medina with the Constitution in 622. This idea that the Ummah has a flexible boundary in a way, and that maybe perhaps it doesn't come with any kind of, doctrinal requirements that you have to believe this about God, or if you don't, you don't belong. And then I also love the term believer, which I believe, Imam Ali, you will know this more than me as a expert on the Quran. The word believer is actually used more than the term Muslim in the Quran. And I think this is really a critical kind of way of looking at big picture, not only Islam, but humanity. What does it mean to be a believer? And Imam Ali, you mentioned earlier, like you consider me a Muslim. And it's amazing because I can ask you, well, what does it mean to be a Muslim? And you can give me your answer. And if I agree with it, I'll be like, yeah, if that's what it takes, sure, no problem. So it's a flexible, a flexible ummah, and it's an inclusive ummah that really is rooted in what we see in the Quran and the life and legacy of Muhammad.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you so very much. Now we have the Vice President of National Islamic University in Indonesia, Professor Andi Bakti.
Okay, thank you very much, Imam Ali, and very interesting conversation tonight. I've been waiting for this talks since yesterday, and then I made a mistake. I thought it was yesterday, so I wrote to Imam Ali that why there is no link in this link address that you sent us, and then you told me that actually tomorrow, which is today, Sunday night in Jakarta. Okay, two things that I would like to raise here. Actually, there are so many things that I would like, but I think for the limitation of time, so I cannot, of course, take all this time for me. And number one is the issue of belief that you just mentioned earlier, that in Islam, actually, we have the so-called pillars or principle of belief, that we believe in God, we believe in angels. We have 10 angels that we consider as coordinators of angels. The Bible also means scriptures. And also we believe in hereafter. Yeah, this is very important. And the last one, we believe in predestination. Imam Ali would say that Quran mentioned Prophet Jesus Christ, I think 20 times, and then Moses even 28 times, and Muhammad as a name is only 5 times. Yeah, although there are so many pronouns there that directly talk to Muhammad. For example, when he say ka, you. One thing that I would like to raise, this is also very striking for many people, I believe, in the Muslim world. If you say that Medina is actually a secular state, of course, clarity of Medina is actually part. The state is part of the Islamic values. Getting a state, okay, it used to be to write him by email, and then, okay, next time we would like to invite you to give a talk in our webinar one day. So we're going to talk to our colleagues here in Jakarta, and we are really expecting you to be one of the great speakers in the future. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum.
Salam. Thank you, Prof. Not only that you invite him to your next webinar, we plan to go to Indonesia.
Okay, welcome after Corona, of course.
Yeah, talk about secularity or secularism itself. It's not one monolith understanding. When you talk about secularism in the United States and Western Europe, for example, it's quite different. In the United States, secularism doesn't mean that you have to, completely separated. In New York City, we have the NYPD women police officers. They have her hijab, and then she is also a police at the same time. There's no problem. All right, please do respond.
Yes, and that's Professor Bhakti, right?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Professor Bhakti, peace be with you as well. Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments and for the invitation. I would love to participate in something like that. It'd be an honor. So yeah, the pillars of belief, belief in God, monotheism, absolutely. Belief in angels, yes, absolutely. Always been a part of my upbringing. My middle name is Michael. My father's middle name is Michael. My grandfather's first name is Michael, and then on down the Irish line. Yeah. God willing, if I ever have a son, his name will be Michael. Belief in prophets, absolutely. You have to as a Christian, and part of the work that I try to do is to make Muhammad as a prophet more familiar to Christians. I'm not trying to tell people who are Christian that they have to believe in Muhammad. I've never said that, even though the Islamophobia industry says that I have. I'm just trying to introduce them. Belief in Scripture, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that inspired me to learn more about the Quran, was the not only the beauty of it, but also the linkages that it had to previous revelation, previous books. Belief in the hereafter, the day of judgment. I'm a believer in that, and predestination. So yes, I mean, 100% lining up right there. If that's what it means, then we're certainly in line. And I'd like to say too, in terms of the issue of secularity, just kind of three things that pop into my mind. This idea that like Islam is not compatible or incompatible with secularism, I just don't think is an accurate statement. Like you often hear these terms being used, like a secular government versus a non-secular government. Like this idea that if you happen to be a Muslim majority nation, you somehow can't have freedom of religion because that is somehow not in the sources in terms of what Muhammad was envisioning, which is just inaccurate. And I've also heard a lot of people in the United States have actually said that, and they happen to be Muslim, they've actually said that the United States government is one of the best kind of forms of government in following Islamic principles, which is a very, very interesting statement because it makes us think more critically about, what are Islamic principles when it comes to governance. And again, we've talked about this so much, the similarities between the two constitutions of Medina and the U.S. Constitution. And I will say for viewers who I think will find this quite interesting, and Professor, I believe it's positioned near where the media hang out, which is interesting for symbolic reasons. But back in 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the wartime World War II president in the United States, he commissioned a German architect to instill a marble frieze, a monument in the U.S. Supreme Court chamber. And Roosevelt tasked this German architect with signifying the greatest lawgivers in U.S. history, in history, human history. So we had some like Confucius, Napoleon, Hammurabi, John Locke, I think, is in there, and it goes on down the line. And one of the individuals who is represented there is Muhammad. So that is symbolic. Now, there's a controversy because they actually show a depiction of Muhammad, which I know a lot of Muslims would take offense to in some ways. But that is the ultimate honor, I think, of the civic nation of this country, actually paying deep respect to the Sharia, essentially, and the Quran, because that's where these Islamic principles are derived from in designing a so-called Muslim.
All right, we go to Pak Irman. Sofian.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Craig.
Good morning.
Yeah, I think we have a problem this day. We have democracy crisis in the world today. I think everybody the use of constitution of Medina to solve this problem? Because it's just universal. There is no agenda for Islamization. So what do you think?
Let me clarify real quick because you were cutting out. I heard the first thing was democratic crisis, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you mentioned the Constitution of Medina.
Yes.
Okay.
Use that.
And how it can be used. So yeah, I think it's what's important to remember here, and I agree with you. I do think that there's a democratic crisis, and I think when you think about how Constitution of Medina was agreed to, right? And we can imagine the believers, the pagan tribes, and the Jewish tribes all coming together, trying to figure out how to best go about ordering society. And this vision only came out of real dialogue and the encounter of commitments and an understanding that what hurts one group in society is going to impact the rest of society, that our social relations are not disconnected from one another. You know, and I believe there may be a passage in the Quran that talks about like what hurts one part of the ummah hurts all, or it might be hadith. And yeah, and I think that spirit is coming out of the Constitution. It's like we're all different, we're diverse, we may be of different races and ethnicities and religious beliefs, but we've agreed to be part of this unit, this national unit. And the only way to move forward is through encountering one another, exchange, dialogue. And I'm talking real dialogue, not this kind of superficial kind of dialogue. Things get heated oftentimes, but you grapple with it. A democratic deficit where we don't see, we see too many people in groups putting their stake in the ground, mixing with one another. We're not truly getting to understand one another. You know, I think unfortunately too, and I'll end on this, social media, for all of its amazing benefits, also fuels this tribalism, you know, because a lot of people can learn about the world on social media and a lot.
Alfonso, please. Any comment? Yes.
Give us opportunity to comment this discussion. And I'm sorry that we cannot comment very much because I haven't read yet your book, That's Right, Meditative Humanity of Muhammad. But I respect you that this writing maybe will give valuable information, especially not only in Indonesia, but also in all the world, especially in the West. So the West view, I think now is ignorant that Islam not religion compulsion and not radical religion and not violence. But I want to ask you that why the negative view of the West until here still that Islam is a radical religion, especially in this time many people who fear Islam, namely is Islamophobia. Islamophobia is logical fear, the specific thing or this situation. So how you see this situation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Imam, so much for that really important question. And I have 4 points. Why the negative views of Muslims in the West? I'm going to speak from the U.S. context, but I think a lot of what I'm about to say is probably relevant to the European context, Australia, Canada, and so on. There's 4 reasons. I think it starts at the top with our leadership or our leaders who happen to be politicians, but they also come in the form of religious leaders, heads of institutions and organizations. And we continue to see individuals in leadership positions spew misinformation and sometimes downright hatred of Muslims. And a continuing kind of theme in the last 20 years where, for whatever reason, you have these leaders and like bashing Islam is like one of their things that they do. And like that's what they're known for. And unfortunately, you have these individuals with huge platforms and forums. What happens, right? How does their information get out? It gets out through the media. The media is continuously fumbling on the issue of proper representation of Muslims and Islam. And CNN, it's also MSNBC. There was a recent controversy in this country in which one leader of a program said some pretty offensive things about Muslims, and this person is like a Democrat. She's like a liberal. So Islamophobia is coming from multiple angles. The problem with media coverage on Islam and Muslims is that they only make it to the news coverage if the coverage shows violence. If it bleeds, it leads. That's the philosophy of the media when it comes to Muslims and interaction with a Muslim. They have never been taught about Islam. They've never been to a mosque. So people are learning about these two massive categories, Islam and Muslims, an entire world tradition, and then a quarter of the world's population. They're learning it through the prism of the media. And the media is biased in many ways. So it's going to be a real challenge in the years ahead for Muslims to get into the media, to change their narrative and to take ownership of their narrative. And then finally, this lack of interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims is very unfortunate. This idea that you have an unfavorable view of, but we need to teach history when we also teach Western history to our youth. In high school and even before, and in college, when we think about Western civilization has never existed, and civilizations happened throughout history. In Al-Andalus, it happened in Sicily, the fusion of cultures. And not enough young Americans know about these moments in history where Muslims and Christians lived side by side. So they need deeper knowledge of our histories as well.
So I can say that number one is politics, and I mean politics here is politicization of the issue for political interest. I'm not talking about the relations between politics and religion, because you can this in America as well, but using religion for political interest, that's what the problem is. Number two is the media. When you talk about media, it's not only about CNN, Fox, we're talking about also movies, even cartoon. Oftentimes it's Islamophobic in nature. And then we talk about ignorance, and of course we have to blame ourselves as Muslims. So I'm going to add another one, that is on behalf of the Muslims, we fail in many ways teaching, but we are the most, people are lacking patience sometimes. So
let me add, Amali, too,
yes.
to extend this important point. A lot of Christians have also failed to show the right side of Jesus, So I'm glad you brought this point up, because we also have to remember that we can change the narrative too. We can change the discourse. You can't empower people to remind them of that.
Professor Sofyan, who is the president of Muhammadiyah University in Padang, Sumatra, please.
Assalamualaikum to all, and especially for Dr. Greg Considine. Good evening. I had anyway 2 questions. First, how do you get some sense Medina age on pluralism compared with 57 of Islamic countries I would see recently? And secondly, any of Muhammad's humanity models apply to some modern countries of Muslim that you see Thank you.
Thank you. Just writing these questions down. So comparing the Medina pluralism to the situation in the world, I think some Muslim majority countries or states are doing better than others, I think, in terms of following this vision. And I actually talk about this in the book. And I actually refer to the Constitution of Indonesia as one that is, in terms of its political philosophy and in terms of the rights, the civic rights that it gives to its citizens, is actually quite close to Medina in terms of freedom of worship. You know, that you can be an autonomous religious community. You can have your church or your synagogue or your mosque. You can have church leaders or rabbis serving in positions of power, and that's okay. And you have that fundamental right. Then the opposite side of that is a country like Saudi Arabia. And when I criticize these countries, I'm criticizing their constitutions. I'm not criticizing the Saudi people. I want to be clear about that. But if you look at the Saudi constitution, it's literally it's actually saying, well, to this one political philosophy, and that's it. You know, if you don't fall into that category, you're in trouble. So those are two kind of interesting examples on the spectrum, you know, and I'm sure that there are other examples along the spectrum, because there's 57 countries, as you mentioned. Explain that again.
Yes, the Muhammad, according